Okay, welcome back. I am making a sign for Typebond. This sign would be used for trade shows and such, maybe even a corporate office. It's just a general purpose sign. And I'm using my ShopBot CNC. And I have a big failure in this video, so if you stick it out, you'll see where I made a big mistake, but I was able to correct course, and I'll tell you all about that. So here I am just seeing I'm using an 11 ply Baltic birch plywood. This is my shop. We call it the Main Street shop. And I use it now more as a storage, but my giant CNC is there, so I'm working on my big 5x10 ShopBot. I think it's called the Alpha. And here I am. This is the Typebond corporate logo. I think this logo is typically used more for their construction division, which is really all the adhesives outside of the wood glue. But obviously here I'm using the wood glue. This is a Typebond 3. I'm gluing this to give this sign a little bit more girth. And you'll notice that I cut it out of several pieces so that I didn't have to dedicate the entire sheet of plywood to just that big circumference. And here I am getting rid of all the fuzz. And now I'm using this new signature series from Total Boat. It's a line of stains. And here I'm using what amounts to be an ebony. It's not what the title of it is, but this is what it is. It's black. And I'm mimicking the graphic. So this is a Typebond graphic. And I'm making it three-dimensional. And my big plan, which is where I fail, is to try and use end grain. So what you see me doing is chopping up. These are old porch planks that I made my boat out of a few years ago. These are Doug fir porch planks with a really, really dense grain pattern in them. It's old growth. They were on the front of my house for at least 100 years. And before that, they're probably 500 years old. I know the grain pattern is insane. But you see what I'm doing. I'm going to make a checker pattern, but just different grain patterns. Not a light and dark, but more just a checker with different grain patterns in it. And cutting and gluing and cutting and gluing. This was about the course of over about 2 days worth of cutting and gluing. And what I'm doing is I want to make a veneer out of the sliced end. And so I keep multiplying it, cutting in half and gluing it together. And there, this is my final cut, so that I would end up with a 9-inch wide piece so that I can glue it over the image of the letters that I will ultimately cut out. And there you see it. And now I just did a quick laser cut of the cardboard on my Aeon laser just so I have the areas that I need to glue. And this is just a piece of, this is like a modern day 2x4 that I did the same thing to, and I was getting real clever, and I was like, I'm going to glue everything at an angle. And I made a couple of serious mistakes, which is why this ended up failing. I had this, what was a door skin or a 1/8 inch thin piece of plywood. And you see me cutting these little tiny end grains. I was afraid I was going to have to make a lot of it, so I was being really skimpy. 1/8 inch, 1/8 inch. I'm trying to stay at about a 1/4 inch, which was a mistake also. So the mistakes that I made, I used this thin plywood as my substrate. One mistake. Second mistake, I'm cutting these really, really thin. And when I glue them together, nothing stays flat. I knew this. That's why I'm using my steel weights to try and maintain a flatness. And here I am thinking I'm being so cool. And I'm gluing these down. And I'm going to make basically a big veneer to then laser cut or CNC out these letters. Now you see me laser cutting it. This is a third mistake. The laser doesn't cut through certain plywoods. It's just every laser does not always cut through certain plywoods. And it certainly didn't cut through this 1/8 inch, which is probably 50% glue, some sort of secret glue. So I was having a hard time. So I said, let me just laser etch the logo on here. And then I'll take it over to the bandsaw, break it down on the bandsaw. And then this is the other part. So you can see it's going to look kind of cool. But over the course of the couple of days, as the glue dried more and more, these pieces were potato chipping. And I said, you know what? That's okay. When I put them on the sign, I'll just make sure I clamp them and they'll stay flat. But as I began to sand them and get them thinner and thinner, now they were so thin, they were going to be below the surface of the pocket that I made. Unless I put something else in there, but now I'm getting in the weeds. So you see here I'm using my Pegasus scroll saw because the blade would fall right inside the laser cut and get me to cut it out quickly. And as I said, over the course of 2 days, the letters are getting curvier and thinner from me sanding them, and curvier and thinner. And I still have to make all the other infill, the shirt, the face, the hat, all these other parts. And I said, you know what? Let me try and paint these letters quick so maybe they'll potato chip flat versus potato chipping up. And by painting them, it made it worse. And here, this is where I realize I have a failure. Listen to this. I can't make the letters flat. It just won't work. Besides, the end grain does not look as good as I expected it to. There's voids. It just does not look the way I hoped it would. I thought I was being clever by using this old wood. It just is not looking good, and it's not working good. And the letters are all getting thinner and thinner as I work them. And that was the hat. It just looks like crap. So I have to correct course and change everything completely if I'm going to get this sign done. This is a good idea, but I got off to a bad start. So the concept was try and accentuate the grain pattern. And in this case, I was trying to do the end grain. I said, you know what? I'm running out of time. Let me just laser cut. So I prepared a piece of white oak that was a little over a 1/4 inch thick. And I laser etched it, laser cut it. And going through this white oak was quite some work. There you can see I'm comparing it to the other letters. They were just garbage at this point. Everything was potato chipped. It was too thin. So I said, it's all about the grain. Let me just find some beautiful grain. So I did that bottom phrase in white oak, a little over a 1/4 inch thick. And now here I'm preparing a piece of sapele. This is going to be used for the Woody car, which you see in the background. But I'm going to dedicate a piece to this sign because I'm looking for anything that has a beautiful grain and a different tone. And so here you see I prepare this. And now that I know the CNC, the laser is not going through some of this material at its thickness. I mean, the CNC will go through a lot of material, but at this thick, I don't want to burn the edges. You realize when you use a laser, you have to go through the wood several times in some cases, and then you burn the edge. So I brought this over. I cut this with a 1/8 inch down cut bit, took 3 passes for each letter, and now here I go, and boom. And now they fit into the pocket that I made, and they're proud, which is one of the things I realized I needed, is that these letters need to go in the pocket but also stick out of the sign. It just gives it a much better presence. And now you see I got the plywood backing, which is the Baltic birch with a black stain from Total Boat. And I have the sapele and the brand, which is the most important prominent part of the logo, is the brand, which is the nicest wood. And the subtitle there is in white oak. And now I'm just using another piece of Baltic birch, but this is 3/8, or rather a 1/2 inch. And these are the other parts. There's the infill for the face and the shirt. And the face and the shirt in the graphic are connected, so I need to cut them apart right there. One will be a different color, and since I have some more of the stain from Total Boat, I decided to just stain the shirt a different color, and the natural wood tone of what would be the character, I used some Total Boat Gleam. And so now here you see me just using this brown color. And I stained it and I let it dry for a couple of hours. I also put the paint on, let it soak, and then I wipe it off. Whatever's still wet, I wipe off, and then the grain begins to show through that. I realized a few things doing those butcher block or end grain cuts. I went onto the plywood, and I didn't need to. I could have glued those. First, I could have cut them thicker, and then I could have glued them to any piece of hardwood and let it all dry. Nothing would have cupped, nothing would have changed shape. It was that plywood that was allowing it to pucker. If I glued it to, say, a piece of hardwood, even if it was a piece of oak or another piece of mahogany or sapele, I could have then cut it off, and the laser probably would have went through all that wood. Would have went through a lot of the lasers just don't go through any kind of plywood, but it will go through natural wood a lot easier. And now here I am just putting gleam on the back sign and gleam on the character's face. And you see it's really more of a kind of like a wooden robot. And now another thing with the laser, because it wasn't cutting through this thick piece that I wanted, I just laser etched the background away and then put it on the bandsaw, and then I got my individual letters here, which were a little thin because I was becoming impatient. But then I noticed that they'll fill into the sign below the surface, which actually kind of gave it a look for this one little feature. So these letters are thin, but then they go below the surface. I'm just pushing them down into the crevice. And the glue that I'm using is Titebond's Quick and Thick. It's almost like a silicone. It'll stay in a horizontal or vertical situation, and it fills in a lot of spaces. It dries clearish, not totally clear, but it'll kind of disguise itself a little bit. And I use it in some cases like a silicone, but it works great on most materials. And I'm just painting that in. I'm just using the gleam to fill in a lot of the gappage there. And if you noticed, I specifically picked a piece of walnut that had a little bit of heartwood next to the sapwood. So you see how it created the illusion of a round vessel, which is what that would be. That's the adhesive caulk tube. So that was a specifically chosen piece of walnut that I had on the wall. And now here I'm gluing the letters in, and I'm banging them in with a piece of wood because they're actually popping in. You have the vector of the hole and the vector of the letters. One's an inside cut, one's an outside cut. And I didn't do any offset, just so they would be a nice snug fit. I also need to be careful. I don't want to break any of those letters. Now this was a bit of a struggle to get that whole thing to pop in, but I did get it. And now the shirt. And you saw me put a spacer in the back since I was hammering on this so hard. I put a 3/4 inch piece of plywood behind it so I could hammer it and send the hammer strikes through to the table, which is why I'm doing it on the steel work table. This steel work table is fantastic for woodworkers. If anybody is thinking about getting a welding table, even woodworkers should have a steel welding table. And this is my final. It still needs to dry some more, and then I might even give it another sanding and another coat. The next coat might be spray on. But there it is. You see it how it is. It's basically done. It was a lot of work, and man, I really went to school on those badly formed letters on that first pass. But having done them wrong, now I know exactly how I would do them right. And that's the importance of making mistakes. And having failures gives you new ideas to avoid those failures again. I hope you enjoyed this. You could find me on Patreon. Thank you, Titebond. Thank you, Total Boat. And thank you, ShopBot.